Berlin is preparing another anti-discrimination law. This one is supposed to eradicate racism in the city administration and also among the police forces. As you can guess, this is in the wake of the George Floyd murder, and the law has already passed the Senate chamber of the Berlin Parliament. It is waiting the finalization in the House of Representatives. Berlin is not only a city, it is also a state, legally one of our states in Germany, the Federal Republic. The problem with that law is, of course, that police officers may refrain from taking action against suspects who have a different ethnicity from their own, or who are specifically of Arab or of African heritage. And the new law is likely to make it easier for any suspect to turn around and call the police officer a transgressor, because the weight of the evidence has to be provided by the police officer. So on top of the burden of evidence now on the shoulders of the accused, the text invites all these activist groups to take legal action because they may be rewarded with financial compensation for the grievance of being a sufferer of racism. And of course, the issue is that it isn't unheard of that people lie to the police. There was a recent incident in the Central Park in New York where a lady was walking her dog. A man approached her, and she was calling the police and told the police officer that this guy was attacking her, and he was filming her. She was with a dog, and she said he was threatening her and the dog as a black man. And this was, of course, I mean, she came up with anything to scare that individual. So she escalated and first said that she may call the police, which did not deter him, because he, unlike Black Lives Matter, was totally trusting of the police. And he said, well, call them. And then she said, I will call them and say that you are a black man and I'm threatened by a black man. And then it went on. And ultimately she told the police officers that she was threatened by a black man, and also the dog was threatened by a black man. And she kind of tried to animate the animal to give some noises to give the impression that even the animal is under attack, and so forth. You've probably seen that video. So my conclusion is, don't trust all women, and also don't trust all men. And if we know that we can't trust all women and all men, then we cannot allow that the police officers are subject to all kind of weird accusations, and that the burden of evidence is suddenly with the accused. As you may guess, I take some interest in American politics, but I am a bit overwhelmed with the amount of it. There's just too much coverage in our media. I try to attract some attention to what is going on in our place internationally, to kind of attach and link up to the general conversation internationally. But the lack of interest our elites display in our grievances is just astounding. And I just want to show you quickly how that looks like in my favorite newspaper, Zeit. The entire George Floyd story is overtalked. I show you the example of my favorite newspaper, Zeit. The first article is Human Rights, 5 Suggestions for an Anti-Racist Political Agenda. Can't wait to hear that, you know. The second is police violence in the United States. Police officers should not use suffocating holds. Diversity. The Reddit co-founder gives up his position for a black person. Then there's some other stuff, criticism of Trump, because, you know, hate for Trump first, everything else comes second. Then there's something about Corona. Then there is more Corona, and here you have this is the hard copy of Zeit. I mean, that's the title, America Sins. So that's what they are concerned about most. Some strategy, of course, for the Democrats, and this is the only thing that matters. So here you have the claim by Richard Ford, money is more important than lives. When looting starts, the shooting will commence. They are citing Trump, and then in this sentence is the entire Trump included, says the American author Richard Ford, and of course he's just presented as a witness. And here again, then more Joe Biden. You know, you barely see that this is even a German newspaper outside of the language, because everybody is just obsessed with their hate. I mean, this is really hate for America. This is nothing short of it. And here you have this the story that I'm trying to cover right now, that there is this anti-discrimination law. And again, the second article after that is about racism, and we are not yet sure that Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd out of racism. We have no idea. There's also this issue with the belief that we should treat this as an example for a claim that's generally broadly made by the Black Lives Matter movement, namely that it is a repetitive occurrence, a constant reality in America, that totally innocent people are killed by racist policemen, and they have a hard time to find any examples. And when they come up with examples, sooner or later you find out that the policemen were actually attacked, or that something is going on. And after all these examples that fell short, George Floyd was the first that somehow comes close to the claim that this is a monthly occurrence. And even here, you don't have an angel being killed by a racist. As far as we know right now, this man is a petty criminal. Not just petty, actually, he was already convicted of armed robbery. So this is a person that wields a gun in front of the face of somebody else to ask for money. So this is most certainly not an innocent angel who had fallen victim to racism. And then we have to also to kind of substantiate the general claim that every week or so white cops are killing totally innocent black people out of racism. We would actually have to investigate whether this person, Derek Chauvin, the officer, whether he was a racist, passed in the Klan or something alike, and separate, or not quite separate, but weakly related to that, we also would have to kind of affirm that this man acted out of racism, because it's totally possible that he may have met George Floyd before. We don't know all these things. The investigation just starts. But what we find in the media is that they claim to have a lot of details that they actually don't have. They are just speculating, and they don't transparently speculate. They also speculate and say, I think that is the case. But you have to kind of mark speculation as speculation. This is not what these people do. They just claim that Officer Derek Chauvin is A, a racist, and B, did what he did because he was motivated by his racism. And as I've pointed out in my previous video, we don't know the motivation of this police officers. And I think David Horowitz is correct in asserting that a conservative is somebody who recognizes that evil exists. There is a banality of evil that the left just can't grasp. They always try to find a deeper meaning. Maybe the reasoning is just very uncomforting, because it is a part of all of us. It was a wisdom we shared in the past, that there was an original sin or whatever, something inside of us that lets us do bad things. And this is really hard to grasp, and it's something we contend with still today. There is a military officer, David Crossman, who sells books on how he has to actually train people to overcome their supposed killing inhibition instinct. And I think he's totally wrong. I think that we, like chimpanzees, are one of the very few species on Earth that do take pleasure in violence and in murder. And this is the reason why there had been things like gladiator fights, and why we do enjoy action movies and so forth. There's no other animal outside the primates, maybe the gorillas, as well as the chimpanzees, that do take pleasure in violence. And it's not just some weirdos who actually do this, who act on it, have subdued their own morality to follow that pleasure. It is probably something that's a part of all of us, and we are capable of refraining ourselves. We have a higher morality. We can see through the consequences of the action. So the lust that may come with actual violence and aggression is tempered with our morality. This is the understanding the Catholic Church had for hundreds and hundreds of years. This is my understanding, and I think this is probably something conservatives have an easier time to accept than people on the political left, who always run around with this broken window approach that if everybody has a nice childhood, he won't do a bad thing. This is not going to happen. And maybe there just isn't an answer to the occasional police officer or any a professional of any discipline to become a murderer at some point. Or maybe there are, but we have to watch out that the remedy is not worse than the disease, to quote Donald Trump. And if murder is the disease in this case, we have to find a remedy that is worthwhile. And for better or worse, a strong police force that is not deterred from taking action against actual criminals is a better safeguard against murder than attacking the police all the time and going after this or that quip about race and so forth. So maybe I shall extend the debate a bit on the racism matter, because racism is a thing. And coincidentally, there is a second story going on. There's supposedly a toxic file in our intelligence service Verfassungsschutz that speaks of anti-Semitism among the Muslim community. They had agents walking into the mosques, hidden agents, and listened to what the preachers had to say. And apparently there were 700 cases of anti-Semitism recorded by the Secret Service. And I must say that I personally do not distinguish between Muslim anti-Semitism, white people anti-Semitism, black people anti-Semitism, left-wing anti-Semitism, conservative anti-Semitism, whatever the heck. For me, it's all the same. It's always the same. Accusations based on garbage, or maybe they shift a bit, but it's always the same aggression, and it's always the same double standard. I think double standards are the main help to identify anti-Semitism outside of the sheer level of aggression. Because I have realized that we have to move this entire microaggression debate out of the room. We have to remove it. We have to kind of talk about what actual aggression is there, and we have to let off a bit to be able to effectively tackle racism as it exists. I'm sure there is anti-black racism in America. There had even been some cases of anti-black racism in Germany. We don't have that entire history. But for example, there was this case of the TV host Annabella Kiesbauer, who received a letter bomb. Her secretary opened it, and she was disabled with a blast. Annabella Kiesbauer was not hurt herself, but the motivation of the perpetrator, as it turned out, was purely racist. So even in countries that do not have a history of racism, you have some weirdos doing odd things. Okay, the law of big numbers. There's this Murphy's law. Bad things do exist if the numbers of observations are big enough. So the reality is, of course, racism does exist, and you have to fight it, of course. But we have to back off a bit talking about microaggression, and have to raise a focus a bit on macroaggression, okay? And then there is the issue that I have heard anti-Semitic statements from non-Muslims and Muslims, and the majority of those were from non-Muslims. At least on the offline world, I cannot identify people online, so it's hard to say how prevalent. But my offline experience with it is that I saw more white Gentile people making racist anti-Semitic statements than Muslims. However, given the number of Muslims, the concentration of anti-Semitic statements and individuals is of course higher in the Muslim community. And this is partly because Muslims don't have a debate culture, they don't have a freedom of speech culture. So if the aunt says something that is stupid, that is an accusation founded in lies, you are unlikely to challenge it because you come from a culture of cowardice, basically, and you cannot challenge a person that you like, usually, or the ideas, because it's all taken personal. Change differences in opinion. This is like the liberals in New York or in California. Differences in opinion are taken as offense against the individual, and this misreading stops people from opening the discussions on the misconceptions of another group. And if somebody is attacked that is not close anyway, why would you correct a mistake? And if you talk to Muslims or to other people that may voice anti-Semitic or racist, anti-black opinions, then it's still a matter of civility. I don't believe in non-civility, that just bullying your way through is the remedy against the disease, because you won't change anybody's mind, and you won't even stop people from proliferating their thoughts if you just stop the conversation with them. You have to be civil with people who say things you do not want to hear. You have to talk them through their mistakes. It is okay to be mistaken. You cannot convince the hardcore cases, but you should enter every conversation with a good faith that the other person may be indoctrinated a little bit, or may have just heard something and not reflected upon it thoroughly, and you nicely try to correct the mistakes logically and with evidence. You don't just scream racism, you don't ostracize. That's not how you solve the problem. But of course, the big challenge is how we identify racism. As I said, for me, it is double standards or giveaway. It is the intensity of it, the level of aggression. That is a relevant thing. If somebody is rude, is very aggressive, is really obsessed over the mistakes of one person or one group all the time, and lets everybody else get away with everything, then you kind of get an idea. There used to be this very poor statement: I can't explain anti-Semitism, but I know it when I see it. Yes, at some point we kind of develop this a hazy view, but we need a better understanding, because right now there are some people who try to exploit, obviously, the actual racism that does exist for nefarious ends, and they are expanding the idea of what racism, what constitutes racism, and we are in a situation where you cannot say no's, and where the police officers cannot admit that some groups are more likely to commit crimes than others. So if you are looking for a purse, you may, as a police officer, choose to not ask the Roma with a 21 purses in front of him if that red one looks very suspicious, because you don't want to be accused of racism, and instead you tell the owner that you haven't found it. This is the reality of the racial profiling campaigning. And a common tactic of this group of these anti-racial profiling campaigners and so forth is that they add ever more cues to the fuzzy definition of I see racism, or I know racism when I see it, and they just add ever more cues. And some of those people have good intentions. Likewise, some of those people who are spreading actual racist statements may have good intentions, just have not, realized the falsehood of their statements. And My concern is, of course, with the people who are not well-meaning. As I said, evil does exist, and you have these people who try to portray everything as racist, and there are people who invent ever more cues with which you are supposed to identify racism, and this can very easily trap you in a way that you cannot defend yourself anymore, where you cannot speak openly anymore. And we must be able to openly address everything sooner or later, and you cannot know in advance what problems are to be solved with what knowledge. So you want as few taboos as possible. And these bad actor, anti-racist activists, they are limiting your speech in a way that I myself feel in a position that I might become offensive intentionally. I want to make jokes, that's one thing, and I feel like I want to do some things that others try to forbid. So if somebody tells me not to make this or that joke, I will probably double down on it, and this will eventually lead to a penalty sooner or later, and I think I cannot avoid it. Sooner or later I will say a thing that other people will take advantage of and send me to the courts. There are bad actors in the world, evil exists, and this was it for today. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you soon. Bye.